Så.
Når du holder talen, kan du så referere til det her? Jeg er lidt i tvivl om, man er nødt til at være skeptisk for at bevare integritet. Om ikke man også skal være åben og begrænse en balance mellem åben og være skeptisk. Hvis man er udviklende skeptisk, så mister man sin integritet.
Ja, det kan være, at jeg får lejlighed at komme ind i det, men jeg starter ikke med det.
Så kan det være, jeg stiller op.
Ja, det er godt.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we're going to get started here. Judith Swift, the director of the Coastal Institute, regrets that she can't be here to join us. But I'm Amber Neville, and I'm happy to welcome you on behalf of the Coastal Institute to the 7th Annual Scott W. Nixon Lecture. The Coastal Institute is pleased to honor Scott's legacy by inviting scientists of great intellectual acumen and accomplishment to join us annually. And today we are especially pleased to have Dr. Paul Vaya make the journey all the way from the Faroe Islands to Rhode Island. There are parallels to be drawn between the Faroe Islands and Rhode Island, and you will soon learn that Dr. Vaya shares many of Scott's beliefs regarding the obligations of scientists to society. And you'll be hearing more about his extraordinary work shortly, but first I want to invite the Dean of the Graduate School of Oceanography, Dr. Bruce Corliss, to say a few words of welcome.
I'd like to echo that welcome here to the Graduate School of Oceanography for this 7th Scott Nixon lecture. Scott Nixon received his PhD from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1970 and was an assistant professor here at the graduate school at that time. And he was here his entire career until he passed away in 2012. And over that 42-year period, he really cut quite a swath in the oceanographic community as a biogeochemist, as a coastal ecologist, and as one that really looked broadly in coastal and estuarine issues. He had somewhat on the order of 40 students during that time, some of which are here. Let's see some hands. Got a few, including his first student, Steve Hale, who is over here, 1973. So he had a significant legacy in terms of his student mentoring and his research. He really was known to be innovative, particularly in the coastal region, but had a strong interest in communicating and extending that science out to broader public issues. And I think that's certainly been a theme that we have with these Scott Nixon lectures. So I'm really pleased to welcome you. This is one of our more important lectures, a distinguished lecture during our year. The Coastal Institute's to be commended for developing and continuing this, and I look forward to hearing our lecture today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Corliss. Among the roles of the Coastal Institute, one of them is being the research translation team for the Superfund Research Center based here at URI called STEEP, which is the sources, transport, exposure, and effects of PFASs. And this effort is led by Dr. Rainer Lohmann, a renowned expert in the field of emerging contaminants and a professor here at the Graduate School of Oceanography in Oceanography, and he will be doing our introduction.
Well, welcome everybody. Little did I know when 5 years ago we started working on this grant that one day we'd have Paul here from the Faroe Island and we'd have so many people interested in PFASs. So things have changed quite a bit over the last few years. I had the luxury of taking Paul to dinner 2 nights ago, and I learned a few more unknown facts, that he was initially not a very good student, but then he changed schools and he became the star as we know him today. So that's very important. Maybe as important is he has German ancestry, so we have some connection, 5 generations back at the least. And maybe most important, he's done, of course, tremendous work impacting and helping children become healthy on the Faroe Islands because of the traditional way they have lived and eaten. And that included legacy contaminants, which we both looked at initially, like PCBs and mercury, and now, of course, what has become much more of concern is PFAS, and he'll tell us all about that. He is Danish and Faroese, so he's a double passport person. He's fluent in Danish, and then sometimes he switches back to being Faroese. He got his medical degree in Copenhagen and then decided to go back to the Faroe Islands, which is arguably more beautiful, a little less populated, a little less cultural activities, but he said he's very happy there because even though it is a beautiful place, he can connect to Philippe on a daily basis. And if that's not good for your health, I'm not sure what else could be. So, I don't want to steal his thunder. We're very pleased to have him here. He's been working on the Faroes with hundreds of children, and apparently he does it well, so mothers keep bringing him children to puncture here and measure and squeeze. So we have all these great measurements from basically almost every child on the Faroe Islands. Thank you for coming, and we look forward to your lecture.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to have this Scott Nixon lecture. It is a great honor for me to come from the small Faroe Islands to the big USA and tell you about our experiences in research work there in the field of oceanic pollution. I have the last 20 years or so. First, I want to say more than 30 years I've been working with my good colleague Philip Granchan sitting here on the first row. But to another side, I have been active in the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program. That is a big program. It has a health branch as well, where we try to monitor the pollutants the populations in the circumpolar area are exposed to. As you can see, the Siberian coast is not well represented. We are working on it to include them, but it has been mainly Greenland and northern Canada and the Faroes. It has mainly been exposure, but effects on humans due to marine pollution are gradually included. We published a AMAP health report in 2015 and reported what we know. And we are actually working on a second report to be released next year. If I take some few slides from that report, you can see that PCB 153 has an uneven distribution with the high column coming from East Greenland, here the Faroe Islands, and Haines, for example, are there. So that's well known in these societies eating, for example, seals or whales, toothed whales, and polar bears, for example, that they are really high in POPs and in mercury. This is Kanak in the North Greenland, East Greenland, and in the U.S. are over here. So the just to start with an overview, our colleagues from Canada, they reported in this last AMAP report that they have found effects similar to what we have found in the Faroes, which I will give you a presentation in more detail in a moment. For example, on mercury, they saw a lower estimated IQ, and the same for lead. And they had noticed an impact on the central nervous system from PCB as well. Different observations, association studies. This is not, we are not talking causality here. We're talking epidemiological studies and association. But that is reported from the Quebec area, the northern Canada. So, when we are communicated this in the circumpolar area, in Greenland, for example, or in northern Canada, and in the Faroes, people sometimes say, okay, mercury has been there always. This is a part of nature, and you should not care. You should not be so scared about that, and you should not try to have us changing our way of life, because that is what it's all about. If I ask a Greenlander up in Kanak to come to reduce his mercury exposure, that means that he will, and he would ask me why. I say, you have to give up eating all this seal meat, and then he would answer, then I have no reason to be here in Kanak or up in Nunavik or a Faroese would perhaps not answer that, but if I asked him to give up eating pilot whale meat, which is a toothed whale, then he would say, this is a really important part of our culture, my identity. But if you look at this slide, you can see this is not a phenomenon that has been there always. It has actually, it started, this rise in mercury concentrations in different tissues here, in humans and belugas, and it's actually happening after the Industrial Revolution. And just to show you what the UNEP said in their last report, that the artisanal and small-scale gold production is the main contributor, and the second is the coal combustion. This is a bit remarkable statement. Concentration of mercury in the Arctic marine animals today are about 10 times higher than in pre-industrial times. This means that on average about 90% of the mercury in marine predators such as seabirds, seals, and whales is anthropogenic in its origin. And I have used that very much in my communication to both the Faroe Society, but even to the Greenlanders and others. This is a new thing. You cannot argue that way. If you look at what is the problem in the Faroes, namely the toothed whales, you can see that the concentrations are really high. Our pilot whale is there, around 4. I think what the pilot whales in the Faroes are, in average, around 2 ppm, and a killer whale is here up at 14 ppm. A tuna would be around 1 ppm or half a ppm. So this indicates that some of these animals perhaps are affected, just as we are as humans, and I will show you in a moment that we are, at least in the Faroes. If the Faroes experience is universal, then you must say the humans are. This picture is from my islands. I'm an islander, born there, raised there, got my education in Copenhagen and went back. Like a salmon, I went back to the place I was born. But when you travel from Denmark to Iceland, you can be like and take a picture like this. This is a whole community, 18 islands where people are living. It means that it's really a transparent society. And when we started Philip and I to study mercury back in the mid-80s, it was still a quite conservative society, I would say, transparent, and the good thing to do studies like this, where you are looking at a subtle effect, there must not be too much disturbing exposure, like alcoholism alcohol consumption among pregnant women, or social disorders and so on. So it should be a stable society. And our society in the Faroes is a stable society. We are quite an affluent society, earning a lot of money on our fisheries, and the population is very limited, only 50,000 souls. The problem is here that in the background you have the hospital system, which I'm a part of. I'm a part of a hospital department of occupational medicine and public health. But here in the foreground you have the exposure source. And when we started, I was actually quite lucky, because the exposure were more or less concentrated in this single habit of eating pilot whale meat, which we have done for hundreds of years, and we have in every detail recorded the catch and how they have been distributed in the society, to a degree that we have tried even modeling the prenatal exposure of people in their 70s with Parkinson. I will come back to that. So this is it happens now and then, not every day, mostly in the late summer. In the beginning of the 80s, there was we knew about mercury accident or episode of big public exposure. For example, in Japan, in Minamata, it's well known. There came a lot of mercury out in the bay from a factory, and a lot of children were born with severe problems in the central nervous system, and later in Iraq. But it ended up with that, among others, the WHO had recommended that this low exposure area, not the high exposure. We know very well that mercury in high concentration is toxic. That is known for hundreds of years. But if you go in the low dose, where, for example, people in the Faroes, people in the Amazon, people in Greenland, people in Madeira, exposed to marine food high in mercury, does that mercury have a negative impact on children's health? That should be done in a prospective way. That means that you not only use a cross-sectional study or a retrospective. You make a cohort where you collect all relevant tissues and store them. For example, mother's hair, mother's blood in pregnancy, and umbilical cord blood. It could be mother's milk. It could be the blood sample from child, and then you wait until you can until you can record the effect. And we choose in our first cohort 1 to do that when they were 7 years of age. And as you can see, we have done it, repeated it at 14 years, at 22 years, and 28 years. And that has been our model for attacking these, I will say, marine pollution problems we have seen in the Faroes. And this is not only a Faroese problem, but this is a circumpolar problem, and it can be seen in other parts of the world as well. As you see, the next cohort here was done in a few years later, in '93. That was because then we wanted to include the POPs, the persistent organic pollutant, PCB, DD, and substances like that. That was not included in the first. We had some blood sample we could analyze afterwards, but and the same for the other cohort. The cohort 5 here is actually the cohort participating in the STEEP program now. But this is I calculated. For example, these 1,000 children come in for 4 or 5 hours each. It is 5,000 hours. In total, we have examined them almost 40,000 hours. They have been in contact with us. So that has been really a big project. What we decided early on was since we had to wait, for example, for 7 years in order to look at the effects, we had to be sure to measure it in different ways, not only for example, in a traditional neuropediatric way. That means that asking a neuropediatrician to do a careful examination, because we knew very well that this, what we expected to find, was not sick children with obvious symptoms of something was wrong in their brain. We were looking for subtle effects which only could be studied in groups and identified by statistical methods. And so we decided to make a neuropsychological testing, a broad one, a neurophysiological, and a neuropediatrics. And lately we have included neuroradiographic method. And another thing we did was we started a cooperation with strong environments in other places. For example, in the neurophysiological area, we created a very good cooperation with Tokyo University, and in the beginning on the psychological side with Boston University, and on the pediatric with colleagues from the Netherlands. Just to show you a few results. If you take on the psychological side, a reaction time here, you can see that there are 4 groups here. One group over 50 microgram per liter in umbilical cord blood, and a group up here, the white line, which is low exposed, under 15 microgram per liter, and you can see there is a difference in reaction time. A simple test of react when you see a picture of a cat on the screen. So when we put all our psychological tests together, we concluded that in various children at age 7 years, each doubling of prenatal exposure corresponds to a motor function of 0.9 month delay, and attention 1.3, and verbal memory 2 months, corresponding to an average effect of 1.5 IQ points. And you can say that is not much, but if you have a person in front of you, 1.5 IQ point, it's not much, and that would not change so much in that person's life. But from a public health point of view, that's quite another story, because that means that my whole population, minus as a Faroese, has an unnecessary extra load on their developmental possibilities, which can be removed. And I mean, I think we are quite smart in the Faroes, but we are not in a position to just, as for the whole population, to give a part of our intelligence away. If we take the neurophysiological method, we use an evoked potential method, and others, where we could measure the speed of the electrical signals in the brain, and we could say a delayed transmission occurred below the lowest exposure level. You can see here, this is the exposure limit used by the US EPA, and actually that limit is based on our findings in the Faroes, namely the Boston naming test. So it was the National Research Council who made a review of all the research done on mercury, and they ended up recommending that our study should be used as a basis for the calculations. If you take a traditional neurological technique, where the doctor tried to estimate the neurological optimality, you see a similar association. Here you have an MRI. We took the boys, not the girls, to Boston, and put them in an MRI scanner. At that time, we had not that equipment in the Faroes, and a Faroese psychologist came with them, and we had different exposure groups, and you see there's a difference in the loading when these boys are finger tapping with left hand, and so we interpreted that the brain with the high exposed in the high exposed boys, they regarding mercury, they had it was extra difficult for the brain to perform that simple task of finger tapping. So we concluded that neurobehavioral effect most clearly on attention, memory, and language, and we concluded, and that is the most important thing, that when we repeated the whole thing, at the age of 14 and 22, the effects are still there. That means that we consider them to be permanent. We had, I hoped, as a public health person in the Faroes, that it should disappear, because of course I must admit, when we started this work in the mid-80s, I expected and hoped that we will not find anything, but I had really to go there back to people when we had published our first results at the age of 7, and tell them that we actually found something, and we had to act accordingly. I will come back to that. In the Arctic area, they always tell us that we can compensate, because there are so many good things in marine food, that will compensate the negative effect of mercury. So, but we have looked at it in the Faroes, and that's right. If we include fish meals, then in our statistical calculation, we can see that when we do that and take the fish exposure away, that the mercury effects become even more clear. But that is not an argument saying that you can just choose to eat as much of mercury containing organisms, like, for example, a seal or a whale, as you wish, because all the good things will compensate. We looked at selenium as well, and that is very popular to say that selenium will give a full protection. I can only say in our study we have not found that. We have a molar excess of 10-fold above the mercury of selenium, and we found no evidence that selenium was a significant protective factor. Other findings: there was at 7 years of age an effect on the blood pressure. We looked later. We looked at the whalers, men in their middle age, and we could see a slight impact on their blood pressure and on their intima media thickness, that the inside of their carotenoids, indicating an atherosclerotic effect. Another effect was we saw that the heart rate variability in the children, both at 7 and 14 years, was affected, and we have interpreted as an impact on the central nervous system, because the brain is with that balance on the from the sorry, it was there, the balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic system is conducted by the brain, of course, and that is dictating the rhythm of the heart. We looked at if the organochlorines, the PCB, for example, had an impact on, they had, but nothing compared to mercury, so that has not been an important part in our communication. But we saw that the frequencies of otitis in children were high, and exposed to organochlorines. And we start thinking about that. And then we start thinking about how to look at in a smart and doable way to test the function of the immune system. And there we choose the child vaccination program in the Faroes, as you have here in U.S. as well. That is a kind of a natural experiment, and you have the same dose of antigen. It could be for the tetanus or diphtheria or measles, or and we have the same age of exposure, and it's clinical relevant, because if we measure the antibodies coming out of the vaccination program, and could show that it was lower than the protective level, then they could have some clinical relevant back. The idea is simply this one, that you stimulate the organism, the child, with an antigen, and you measure the antibodies coming out of it. And in the Faroes and in Denmark, the program looks like this. You give them at 3 and 5 and 12 months, and a booster at 5 years. The red dotted line should indicate the level of the protection level. So what came out of that? Yes, we found that there was a negative association between the PCBs and the vaccination antibodies, both for diphtheria and for tetanus. And of course, we were a bit surprised, but on the other hand, we had started out wondering if there was any reason for the high otitis occurrence in the Faroes. Now I come to the fluorinated compounds for the rest of my speech. In this area, you can see in seawater, there are, as you probably all know, we have these compounds, and some columns are high, for example, up here in Svalbard, but in other places as well. In the Faroes, we start looking at that in the beginning of in 2000, beginning of just after 2000, and in 2003 we randomly selected 300 people between 18 and 60, and now we have looked at them again 10 years later, and we can compare what has happened. And I will show it to you here. You can see that that in 2003 and compared with 12, that the first 5, the PFAFs, they the concentration are reduced. But for PFNA and PFDA, there's an increase. So, but on the other hand, if you compare what our concentrations with other societies, like here, the blue column is the Faroes, as a Faroese woman, and the green one is a U.S. American woman. So you can see that we are not particularly high, and this is a difference when we talk fluorinated compounds. Fluorinated compounds, this persistent compound, they are almost everywhere. And if you remember, when I showed to you in the beginning, we had a high PCP concentration, high mercury concentration, and the general the concentration in the general population in U.S., for example, were low compared. Here we have not that picture. Here we have similar concentrations. On the other hand, here is some figures from our cohort 5, showing that a certain reduction happened at age 5 years compared to maternal and child concentration at 1.5 year. And you have, this is some concentrations, some figures I have from Greenland, and they are quite similar. But we did, we asked our cohort members in cohort 1 about the dietary habits when they were 14 years. And what we found was one whale meal every 2 weeks increased the PFAS concentration in a 14-year-old by 25% and PFNA by 50%. That we were surprised by that, I must say, because here we have a marine component. Of course, that is only one component, because we have on top of that all the other exposure sources, as you have here in U.S. from our textiles, and in our furnitures and so on and so on. But this we decided to have a look and use the same method as you saw we use for the PCB or the organochlorines, namely using the exposure we have measured at pregnancy in 5 and 7 years, and the outcome of tetanus and diphtheria. And we published it that we found actually a quite surprisingly big effect on the immune system. As you can see here, for diphtheria, that is PFAS at age 5 on the x-axis, and anti-diphtheria at 7 years on the y-axis. And if you make a more complicated structural equation model calculation, a doubling of the serum-PFAS, end up with a really almost around 50% reduction in the antibody production in the body. That was, to me at least, as a public health officer, quite concerning. Of course, it could be without any significance. Perhaps it was only a question of if this vaccine were efficient or not. But the perspective is certainly it could be a lack of protection to diseases to come, to autoimmunity, and so on, cancer and whatever. So in 2013, the Norwegian produced published a similar work on measuring rubella antibodies, and they reported that the episode of common cold and gastroenteritis were related to the concentration of fluorinated compounds. And Philip's department, Dalsager and her colleagues, they made a smart monitoring of the society of around Odense, that using text messages, when asking the parents to text in every 2 weeks if the child had any fever episode, or and they concluded that the higher exposed to the fluorinated compound, they had an increased proportion of episode with fever and nasal discharge, indicating again that these substances have do something with the immune system and our ability to keep infections away. Breastfeeding has been quite problematic from a public health point of view, because most people will say breastfeeding is so good, it should be continue as long as possible. On the other hand, we must say that in our research, we can see that breastfed, this child has been breastfed with 6 months exclusively and 12 months with mixed diet. You can see that steep increase in the concentrations, the child's concentrations of these substances, and compared to that blue dotted line with breastfeeding less than 1 month. So what we have here, to put it a bit brutal, in a way the mother is detoxifying herself by transporting it over to the child. And that's of course not intentional, but that has to be communicated, and we have tried to do so in the Faroes. It's a difficult communication, I can say. Now I will show you a few spots from the Faroes and our findings. We have two disease groups which are extraordinarily high in the Faroes compared to other societies. The first is Parkinson's disease. We have a prevalence of around 200 per 100,000 people, which is around the double of Denmark. And we try to look at that. We as I said before, we calculated. We made a case control design and tried to calculate the prenatal exposure based on this record of whale catches. There was nothing to find there, but in the questionnaires, the patient reported more consumption of traditional food. Of course, that could be a reporting bias, but that is what they said. And we found in the blood that the concentration of beta HCH was higher than in the controls. And then the other group, the first was the Parkinson's, the other group is inflammatory bowel disease. We have record high prevalence in the Faroes. It is higher than the highest in the Europe. And in this study, we looked at the Faroes who have moved to Denmark, from the Faroes to Denmark. Denmark have excellent registers on diseases and when they come and they leave. So it was possible to calculate and compare the prevalence of inflammatory bowel diseases among the Faroese immigrants and compare that with the Danes. And what we saw was that in the beginning there was, of course, a higher prevalence compared with the Danes, but it disappeared over time, over one generation in men and now 2 generations in women. And we concluded that this could very well be an indication of an environmental or a genetic environmental factor. So we have every reason to look closer at that. And we do that actually now, trying to use our cohort members as and the mothers and even cohorts of elderly people to find out if these people with inflammatory bowel disease are exposed higher than the controls. Another area, and now this will be only small windows. We asked the parents of these children when they were 5 and 7, our poor children, if you to answer a strength and difficult questionnaire, which is called SDQ, used in many places, and to find out if there were any behavioral problems among the highly exposed. And we concluded that in SDQ subscales there was a significant association in regard of hyperactivity and peer relationship and contact problems. I will not say that this is our observation, but as you saw in the first slide on one of the first slides from Canada, they had similar observations there. So perhaps there is something in this. Another observation has been that shorter duration of breastfeeding was seen at elevated exposure to the fluorinated compounds. A doubling of maternal serum PFAS were associated with a reduction in duration of both total and exclusive breastfeeding. So, indicating an endocrine disruption effect. And it seems like that substances like HCB and PFAS and PFOA were associated with increased BMI in the children of 18 months and 5 years. And now this is the last regarding effects. The serum PFAS concentration at age 5 years were associated with increased odds of asthma at age 5 and 30 years among children not vaccinated with MMR vaccine, the measles vaccine. But on the other hand, the association were reversed among MMR vaccinated children. So here are two findings. One thing is in the unvaccinated we saw something, and in the vaccinated we saw the opposite. So perhaps MMR vaccination the disease, muscle disease, perhaps it has a special effect we don't fully understand today. Now I will go to Greenland. Here is some figures on the breast cancer incidence in the circumpolar area, and perhaps you see an increase, but it could be, as far as I can see, a reporting problem, phenomena, because the register has become better. But the interesting thing is that my colleague in the AMAP work, Eva Bonfil-Jørgensen, she had looked at some breast cancer cases and made a control group, and she found that there was a significant association between serum fluorinated compounds and the risk of breast cancer. So that was what I had to say about effect. I know that was perhaps a bit complicated and a bit boring. So one thing is to make the research and publish it, and I must say that a lot of some people in the Faroes, even people, high-ranking people, said that is your job to publish and let us do the recommendations, take the consequences. And but I was not in my society. I was not convinced that that was right, because we have seen something, and it was my opinion that that should be communicated back to the participants, not only the participants but the whole society. And that was, we published our 7-year result in 87. So in 89 we went out and gave a general dietary recommendation regarding pilot whale meat and the fat tissue, namely the blubber. But as we had more and more results, in 2008 the first medical officer in the Faroes, that would be the Surgeon General in the U.S., and I went out and stated that it's recommended that pilot whale is no longer used for human consumption, of course, and that created a lot of reaction in the society, especially the middle-aged men, old men. They opposed, saying that this was not right, because that was destroying a culture, as I mentioned in the beginning. But the woman, here, this is a good message. The woman, the mothers, they actually listened to what we said. Because here, this is cohort 1, there we started with a cord blood level of 22 microgram per liter. And you can see here, in cohort 5, many years later, in 2007 to 9, we are under 5. And that is not because the concentrations of mercury in pilot whale have gone down. It is almost the opposite. It's because they have changed their habits. So, in that cultural conflict, where a part of the society says it's important to preserve to keep our tradition, the woman listened to what we said. And you can speculate why they did do that. My conclusion is that they are caretakers. They are responsible for their babies, and listen to and practice a kind of a precautionary principle. And I think that is extremely positive from a public health point of view. And even the POPs with a long half-life of PCB 153, around 10 years or something, you see a reduction. And so, just to finish, this is a cultural part of it. This is a part of the culture, part of the art. And the last picture is from my green islands. What I want my finishing remark should be that it has been easy to advise on mercury because and the organochlorine, because the sources were so concentrated in the whales. But when we come to the fluorinated compound, it's much more complicated now, because I cannot say, and they ask, of course, every sensible person say, what shall I do then? You report that my concentrations are high and their effect on my child. What should I do? And I have no clear answer regarding the fluorinated compounds. And that means that this is not a simple message. What is needed is a much broader answer that we have to change perhaps a lot of habits, a lot of consumer products have to be changed, and so and so. But these are really persistent pollutants. The fluorinated compounds are really persistent, and it will not just disappear or evaporate and disappear from our world. So, on the other hand, I must say, then you can ask if it does it give any meaning to communicate that along just as I done with mercury and the organochlorides, and my answer is yes. By doing that, at least I'm creating an awareness, an opinion, and perhaps a political reaction from that small society, and I think that is the way to go. But perhaps we can discuss that afterwards. So, thank you for listening to me. They gave me 1 hour, and this is useful. Thank you.
So we're going to do a Q&A, but we're going to do it in a panel style. So we're going to have Pal join. We're also going to try to adjust the lights here a little bit. And we're going to be joined by some of the researchers on this STEEP grant. We're going to be joined by, right up front here is Dr. Philippe Grandjean. He is leading a lot of our epidemiological stuff with Pal, who is the clinical lead in the Faroe Islands. Philippe is based out of Copenhagen and also at Harvard's School of Public Health. Then, of course, we have Reiner Lohmann, who you all know and love, and he is spearheading the whole grant, as well as doing research on passive sampling of PFAS in the environment. And then we have Dr. Angela Slitt, who is at the URI College of Pharmacy, and she is leading many of the laboratory studies that complement the work that Philippe and Paul are doing to really look at some of the human health effects, looking specifically at individual PFASs. And she specializes in the effects on the liver, but also does other things as well. So if you guys have questions, raise your hand. Amber's going to be running a microphone so that we can have good volume for the recording. And we'll open it up, and you can feel free to ask any of our panelists a question. Any question down here?
Thank you. Marcella Thompson from URI College of Nursing, but also the Brown University Superfund Research Program. I do have 2 questions for you. One is that if you have recommended that the Faroese no longer eat the pilot whale, are they still going to hunt, or are we seeing some form of cultural genocide occur, where you lose the culture, you lose the language, and you lose the stories around that particular event?
They still hunt, that cultural genocide has not been so hardly put in the Faroes, but it is in other parts of the circumpolar area. You are quite right. When I discuss this with colleagues up in northern Canada and in Greenland, they say, if you are really are strict on this, it means that they cannot be here. And on the other hand, I don't know if that is true, because, for example, in East Greenland, I think it was around 80% of what they were eating was actually importing. So what I'm thinking is going to happen in the Faroes. Now it is a kind of a resistance to people coming from outside. For example, the sea shepherd and coming in and telling us that Pamela Anderson and others coming, saying you have to stop killing whales. And the young men in the Faroes, of course, they will rise and protect their culture. Young men do that always in countries and in tribes and so. But my problem is that I've been squeezed in between, because they consider me a kind of a Trojan horse as opponent of the culture. So I have been very precise on that. I will not have any opinion about the whaling, but I have an opinion about health and what is beneficial to your health. And I think that message has been understood in the Faroes and respected. Otherwise, I had to give it up.
Thank you. The second question I had, it's kind of up for grabs if who would like to answer this, but the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry has predicted that the health effects of PCBs on methylmercury and vice versa are additive. Now we have a third in the mix of the PFAS, and is there any speculation as to what the prediction is for, now we've got 3 instead of 2?
Philippe is giving this one to me. I would suspect yes, but realistically, there still are the studies on on mixtures are really just kind of emerging. And there's a lot of discussion about even at kind of the regulatory agencies, what should the mixtures look like, what ratios. So I do think that you'll start seeing those studies emerge, and that's kind of something that we think about a lot. But I don't think the literature is there yet. But, I wouldn't be surprised if obviously people start publishing that together there's more of an effect of just than one. And obviously there's a lot of discussion about how to regulate this class of chemicals and regulate them as a class instead of one by one. We'll be chasing them.
The toxic actions could be different, but the outpoint could be that much more.
Yeah. It seems as though, so to me, looking through the literature, even the replacements often hit the same pathways, but maybe the pharmacokinetics could be different. So there's issues with potency. Often, many of them, not all of them, having a lot of overlapping mechanisms of action, but the pharmacokinetics are different. But we do know, I think anybody who's studied bisphenol A would tell you that you can have undetectable levels of bisphenol A in the mom, but yet still see adverse health effects manifest. So also you have to kind of argue that perhaps just because something's not detectable in the blood doesn't necessarily mean that it's not having an impact on the tissues and signaling and things like that.
Any other questions?
I have a question about the reduced antibody response to the vaccinations, and wondering if can that be overcome with a change in the schedule of vaccinations or the dosage, and if so, is that being implemented?
Yeah, we actually came in that situation when we saw, and it was quite a few were under the protected limit. I come in a doctor's dilemma. Should I be a researcher or a doctor? And of course, I had to tell them, you are now under the official limit of protection, and you are 7, 8 years of age. I would recommend that you come have another vaccination. And I offered them for free to do that. And they came in, and I gave it to them. If we could just adjust the arrangement of these of the boosters or so, honestly, I don't think that is enough. If you shall compensate, you have to revaccinate more than that. Means that you have to take, for example, 1 or 2 additional.
Other questions? Yeah.
Maybe one perception that has been, which may be a little bit misleading, is that the beneficial dietary components of fish may, maybe erase, the deleterious effects of PCBs and methylmercury. But it seems from the data that you're showing, with antibody to the immune system, that could be really misleading. Can people, read that and they think, well, the Faroe Island studies have proven, diet can really overcome this, and this is really not a problem. So my question related to that is, what about other, whaling communities in different parts of the world? Is there any comparative studies and just, your reflections on that?
And there are 3 main studies we used to say. One was the first was in New Zealand, made by a Swedish Dr. Källström, And then a big study in the Seychelles. The New Zealand study was the results from there was similar to ours, but in the Seychelles they have not found effect. They are and you could of course say that could be due to many things. The diet could be different because they are eating a lot of vegetables and their genetic disposition could be different. So there are many, there have been done several studies, but the three great has other mentioned.
I mean, what's really concerning with the data you showed, how in the U.S. women have higher levels of PFAS than in the Faroe Islands.
Yeah.
And yet, we don't know about these women's dietary habits. So
and that is one of the reasons I showed you this effect, or this pouring effect, that what is relevant for us is relevant for you as well, because you are in the same exposure. That is not the case for mercury, the same, and PCB, but for the fluorinated, it is the case. And that is the reason I gave you all the details.
But compounded to that is our bad habits of eating in the structures.
Yeah. But that is a big problem you mentioned first about the fish consumption. I have done my best in the Faroes when I said that to the people that this contaminated seafood pilot waste is not good for you. They did not consider that to be the case for all seafood. That was so. I used my position as chairman of the health board to tell them, please eat fish low in contaminants like cod, which is a traditional. But we are in a very privileged position because we are big producers or catchers of mackerel and herrings and so, which are relatively low in contaminant and high in fatty acids. So it has been, from a public health point, very important to me not to have that dietary change ending up with pizza and junk food. Trying to take that out of the ocean, which is so uncontaminated as it can be.
There's another benefit that the Faroes will have because Denmark, or one of the big Danish retailers, will eliminate PFASs from their consumer products. So that'll trickle down to the Faroes much, much quicker than in the US because we are still debating what we should regulate and how. So.
Hi, Mike Burns, Rhode Island Department of Health. I just had a follow-up question to that in terms of the FDA recently updated their guidance for fish consumption. And do you agree with the current advice of eating up to 3 meals per day? Do you think they're wording it correctly, or do you think how do you strike that balance? Because I'm trying to do this now at the Department of Health, between scaring people about mercury but then keeping them from eating fish when fish overall is beneficial. And so do you feel like the guidance they're giving is too scary in terms of eat up to, or how should we balance that for all of these?
There was a paper in JAMA Pediatrics a few months ago by 2 retired lawyers from FDA and a physician who hasn't done mercury research. But anyway, they recommended that pregnant women forget about mercury and eat lots of fish because fish are healthy. And we responded to that. A colleague from Columbia University, a colleague from Johns Hopkins, and I myself. And we said, hey, there are 12 prospective studies that have shown adverse health effects associated with prenatal methylmercury exposure from seafood. And the evidence is so strong that for you to say that the N-3 fatty acids overpower that and that women should just forget about it is making a big public health hazard out of it. What we should do is exactly what Paul said, eat low in the food chain. Be aware of the mercury. It may be in some cases, the N-3s will overpower the mercury and you will get a benefit out of it. But our concern is also that not the total outcome, but it's like maximizing the benefits from eating fish. Because if you're minimizing that by getting mercury and perhaps also PCBs or PFASs, you're not giving your child the optimal diet. And if you're advising like those two lawyers, former lawyers from FDA, you are actually putting, the next generation in harm's place. And so, I think we made a pretty strong response, and I haven't seen any media coverage of it. And basically, I think that we as physicians need to advise women to eat fish, but like cod or fish that is low in the food chain, rather than, of course, pilot well. But I don't know, am I allowed to, I have a gift for Paul here, you see. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. And it relates to this discussion. Now, Paul doesn't know, so it's a gift that I brought from Japan, and it's actually canned meat. And I don't know if you can see what it is. There is actually right there's the rear end of the animal. And I'm going to donate this to Paul. And he can't read what's in it, of course, but he can see the picture. And now I'm going to ask you, Paul, the Japanese eat this. And I'm not sure what the species is.
It's a dolphin.
Okay, it's a dolphin. So what do you think? There are millions of Japanese who eat this from the top of the food chain in Japan. What is your opinion?
More studies.
Maybe it's tasty.
Yeah, but I think that, now I'm a bit serious, but I think the major exposure of the Japanese is actually their tuna consumption. It is not. These dolphin slaughter they do in a few places. It's very limited compared to the big population of Japan. So this is, but of course, I can answer you with a counter story. When I came out in 2008 with that recommendation, do stop eating idle data, are you serious? Yes. Then that was in November, and in December there was a Christmas celebration up at the local hotel. We were 300 people, and we were all sitting there at tables, and the first is served as a starter with some dried whale meat and blubber. And they said they were looking at me. And the woman, both sides of me, said, Paul, don't be so boring, eat it. And I said, okay, like Adam and Eve, I said, I will do it. So, and I did it. Eat it, and I had a bit conscious. But then in the break, I met a man, he came to me, Paul, I was the only man at our table following your advice. And after that, I decided I will never eat a can of this. Because if you give a recommendation, you have to stick to it.
Can I tell an additional anecdote that relates to this?
Question?
Oh, okay, all right.
We'll see if there's questions. Let's take one more question, and then you can come back to your story.
This is less medical and scientific, but more of an advocacy question.
impression is that
Yeah.
that a lot of our work related to plastic in the ocean is involved in things like banning plastic bags and cleaning up beaches. And I'm wondering what your recommendations would be for trying to reduce the amount of production of plastic and the insertion into the ocean of plastic. Because it seems like we're sort of, as I think your magazine said, we're mopping the bathroom floor while the tub is overflowing in terms of the way that we address plastic in the ocean. Do you have some advocacy recommendations on how we could have a more positive effect on the polluting of our ocean?
I think the biggest benefit of the problem of plastic in the ocean is that it makes people very aware of pollution of the oceans. All these contaminants that Paul talked about, we cannot see, we cannot smell, we cannot detect other than with fancy tools that we have in the labs. But at least with the plastic that we see in all kinds of places where they shouldn't be, it raises awareness and it points out that we have a very unsustainable way of living. And as an ocean state, of course, we should take leadership and make sure we discharge less. That will at least help Narragansett Bay to become a little cleaner. On the global scale, it is a much different problem. But same with plastics as for PFAS or PCBs, these compounds are made, they last for generations, and that is not a good way to live on if you just have one Earth to live on. So that would be my 2 cents.
I just follow up though. If capitalism, corporate production of plastic is supposed to be a great convenience for consumers, and consumers turn against that, but we continue to produce more and more plastic, it seems to me just as much a war is ending up in the ocean. I'm wondering if there aren't some stronger regulatory or legislative kind of ways of addressing people creating things without a plan for how they're going to be recycled, or whether or not there's downsides of producing a product that then poisons everybody to the point where we may, in future generations, not be able to eat seafood at the rate we're going.
Yeah, I think the idea of a precautionary principle is invented. It's just not used in the US very much. And we could also include external costs. All of that would tremendously change the way we operate, but you need some champions in Washington to do that. It doesn't look like there are enough at this point. So, I mean, yes, obviously it has to be some regulations either at the state or ideally at the federal level. Agreed.
Other questions? Philippe, did you want to share your experience?
I want to ask a question of Paul, rather than, I can always tell you an anecdote some other time. When we started this meeting, there was a quotation from Scott Nixon, who talked about the integrity of science. And he then said that we must remain skeptical. And I'm sure it's taken out of a larger sequence, but there is a concern nowadays about undue skepticism. And so I wanted to ask Paul, what do you recommend in regard, should we be more skeptical? Should we be more open-minded? Should we have a combination of both? In some situations like climate change, we just don't have the time to be skeptical. We have to be open-minded and look for solutions to this. But with regard to marine food contamination, what do you think? There's been lots of skepticism that has been aimed at you.
Yeah.
But should we as scientists also be open-minded, and how much?
Yeah. Normally I would say that doubt is a blessing, and it gives you a freedom, and doubt is really an academic thing. I appreciate very much to be in doubt. But even if I was in doubt in the Faroes about are our results right, or is there a methodical error somewhere, and could be very I could be skeptic or not, but the point is that you sometimes you have the responsibility to take action. And for example, I could say, this study should be repeated somewhere else. Before I will confront the Faroese population, asking them to change their culture, our culture. On the other hand, that means that I should wait, we should wait for 10 years. And if our initial results were right, we were responsible for some negative effects, for some loss of intelligence, or some negative, really important impact on the immune system. So you have to decide. Skepticism can be really just a way of not doing anything. I am an elevated skeptic, and time will show. But in public health, you not always have the time needed. You must decide to act or not on what you have. And the good thing in my case was that these results were produced in our society. If I should transform them from, for example, the Seychelles or from the Amazon or from Madeira, then I could have a reason to be skeptic, because I could say this is not the same society. This was the results were produced in the society who eventually should have the recommendation based on them. Overcoming skepticism, right?
All right. If there's no final questions, then we would like to thank our guest, Dr. Palvai, for coming from the Faroe Islands and giving us a great talk that I think really exemplifies some of the things that Scott Nixon believed in as far as challenging some of the way we think, and even if that's a hard thing to do, like going against some of your cultural traditions, I think that is something that Scott would have been very supportive of. And so thank you very much for coming. And then following this, out in Studio Blue, we are going to have a reception if you'd like to ask any of our panelists any additional questions or just mingle and enjoy the end of your Thursday. Thank you.